All right, let's get started. Any questions so far on what we've done? All right, let's start building a pro forma balance sheet. It's the next step in our model. Now that we know what our capitalization is going to look like right after the transaction, how much debt, how much equity, we need to integrate that into the pro forma balance sheet and also make some transaction-related adjustments along the way. Okay? This is where the modeling for LBOs, there's not a lot of rocket science to LBO modeling. And this is where the modeling really takes on more of an Excel flavor. We're going to be doing a lot of linking. When we get into the model tab tomorrow, we're going to be doing a lot of inserting rows, inserting columns, changing references, whatnot. There's not really a lot of finance until we get down to calculating that IRR. All right, so there's really a lot more Excel work, so a good chance to practice skills in terms of linking and in terms of the Excel skills. So first thing we need here is we need our historical balance sheet. All right, so what does the balance sheet look like for the company immediately before the transaction? What we're going to do for every line item in this column is we're going to link to our historical balance sheet. That is our 12/31/2008 balance sheet on the model tab. So for cash, I want to say equals. I'm going to control page down to my model, G47. I promised I'd put up some of these shortcuts again as we go. All right, so to navigate between tabs, control page up or page down. Control page up will take you left across the tabs. Control page down will take you to the right. I know a few people weren't here last week, but as we talked about in class, we want to get away from using our mouse. Use the keyboard shortcuts both to navigate and to create our links. All right, so we would not want to say equals, then use our mouse and go down and select the model tab, then use our mouse and go select G47. We want to say equals, control page down, and we want to arrow key over to G47. It saves a lot of time. All right, now what we can do here, because accounts receivable, inventory, other current assets all appear in the same order here, we've done that intentionally, as they do on the historical balance sheet, we can copy that formula for our cash and paste it down below. So if we hit Control C to copy, for copy shortcut, Control C. If we hit Control C to copy, then Alt E S F, same formula same shortcut as we were using earlier. Hit Enter, F9 to recalc. We get the numbers. We also preserve that underlined formatting in that fourth cell, that cell for other current assets. Now that we have that, right, again, in this case, we cannot use Alt equals for our sum function. Remember, Alt equals, what it does is it'll go up to the last number, the last cell containing a number in the range directly above it and capture all those items. If we did it in this case, we'd get 2008 as well. We don't want that. So we'll type in equals sum and select the four numbers above that. So equals sum B6 through B9, which should give you 27 million. It kind of brings me to another point on our pro forma balance sheet. And this, maybe it's a matter of personal preference. On all of the subtotals, I like to calculate them here. I could link back to my historical balance sheet. I could link back to the cell where it says 27 million. But if some of my references were off here, then I wouldn't know it. All right, so I like to link to each of the individual line items and then calculate all the subtotals right there in line. It's a way to check and make sure you've linked to all the right numbers and that they do in fact add up to what they should. Right, so that's my total current assets. I'm going to link to gross PP&E. Paste that down to cumulative depreciation using Alt-ESF. So again, I want to preserve that underline. When I hit F9 to recalc, I should have these numbers, 323.2 for my gross PP&E, 45 million for my cumulative depreciation. Now, real important here, don't make the mistake of summing these up. Remember, net PP&E represents the difference between gross PP&E, cumulative depreciation. So we want to say equals B12 minus B13. And you should get 278.2, which matches the historical balance sheet. All I'm doing right now is if you go to the Model tab, I'm basically, at this point, I'm basically replicating the balance sheet that's on my Model tab, the historical balance sheet. That's all I'm doing. And then I will adjust that balance sheet for the transaction. So when I've done this correctly, my historical balance sheet column will look exactly like it does here. All the numbers will match. Amortizable intangibles equals G57 on the Model tab. And that's actually blue. It shouldn't be. It should be black. So once you get that link set up, change the color to black. That should be a link, not a hard code. Right, so the reference is G57 on the Model tab, and change it to black. Change the font color to black. And then same thing as we did above, Alt-ESF. That is Control-C to copy. We'll paste that into the goodwill cell using Alt-ESF to paste. So you'll get 0 for amortizables, 5 million for historical goodwill. Remember to hit F9 too. Make sure you've recalculated everything. Then total assets, we're going to say equals total current assets plus sum. And I just want to sum the items from net PP&E all the way through goodwill. So equals B10 plus sum, left parenthesis, B14 through B17. I'll leave that formula up, but you should get a result of 310.2 million. Right. This matches exactly. It should match exactly what our historical balance sheet says. We're going to now do basically the same thing for our liabilities and equity side of the balance sheet. So for accounts payable equals, control page down twice, G62 on the Model tab. I'm going to copy and paste that using Alt-ESF. And then sum my current liabilities using Alt equals. All right, so I created a link for my accounts payable. Then I copied that. I used a paste special to paste that into the cells for accrued liabilities and other current liabilities. And I used that paste special formulas, so I would preserve the underline here. And then for total current liabilities, I used Alt equals to sum all those items above it. And if you do it right, you should get 13.4 million for total current liabilities. Does everyone have that? Now as we scroll down, here's where the balance sheet starts to take on a little bit of a different look structurally than our historical balance sheet. Here in the pro forma balance sheet tab, we're distinguishing between our existing debt, that is the old debt of the company before it's bought out, and the new debt that's going to be borrowed in connection with funding the transaction. All right. So if we're going to make those, we've added these rows because we're going to need to make adjustments in our adjustments column relative to the new debt. If there are no rows to accommodate those, we can't do it. All right, so we've added those rows. What we'll do a little later, and I think we actually may get to it today, is when we go and drop this into our Model tab, we're going to have to make room in our Model tab to accommodate those as well. You'll, I think, understand more of that when we get there. But for right now, recognize that we have an existing debt section for the old debt that's going to get paid off. We have a new debt section for the new debt that we're borrowing. Does that make sense so far? Okay. For existing debt, just like we've done so far, we're going to take that from the from the Model tab. Our revolver, we're going to say G67. And you can use a fill down command to paste that down. All right, remember, there are two different fill commands that we've used. And it's just like a copy-paste, but it's an extreme short form of that. All right, so if we wanted to fill something to the right, like we did often last week, it's Control-R. To fill something down, we used Control-D. All right, and for those of you who weren't here last week, I'll show you that again. My revolving credit facility, the first thing I did was link to my historical balance sheet. So I said equals G67 on the Model tab. Now there are a few ways I can copy that down. I can do a copy, Control-C here, and then Control-V to paste, F9 to recalc. Straightforward copy-paste. Or I can use what we call a fill command, where I can just fill this formula down as far as I want. If you use a fill command, it'll just fill it in every cell below there where you specify, or if you use a fill right command, it will put that same formula into every cell to the right. Fill down command, I need to select, first of all, the cell that I'm copying, hold down Shift, and then select my destination range. In this case, the term loan and the unsecured debt. I should have all three of those cells highlighted. Then you can just hit Control-D, F9 to recalc. Okay, now we come to our new debt, and right now, remember, this is a split second before the transaction gets done. The new debt doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been borrowed. For our new debt, we're just going to enter zeros. We're going to hard code them. And then other liabilities, we're going to link to our historical balance sheet equals G70. We want to pick up that $2 million of other liabilities. Okay, and then total liabilities, we're just going to take the sum of everything from total current liabilities through other liabilities. We're just going to sum up all of our liabilities, basically. Make sure you start with B24, total current liabilities. Don't start with accounts payable, because you'll include total current liabilities. You'll be double counting. And so your formula should be equal sum B24 through B37, and you should get 206.2 million as your subtotal for that. Then lastly, shareholders' equity. We'll just link to the historical balance sheet. For retained earnings, we'll say equals G74 from the Model tab. Control-C to copy, Alt-ESF to paste for common stock. F9 to recalc. You should have retained earnings of 94 million, common stock of 10 million. And our total shareholders' equity, we can do an Alt equals to sum. 104 million. Total liabilities and equity is just what it says. Equals B38 plus B43. And you should get 310.2. 310.2 should match our total assets, and it does. All right, so the balance sheet's in balance, cardinal rule of accounting. Remember what we said last week, we oftentimes put in this check figure just to make sure we're in balance. And here you can calculate it two ways, either total assets minus total liabilities and equity, or the reverse. Either way, we want to measure the difference between the left side and the right side of our balance sheet. So here I said equals B45 minus B18. But it'd be the same thing as saying equals B18 minus B45. Take the difference between those two, and if it's zero, it means we're in balance. Our check figure zeroes out, we're in balance. All right, so step one is complete. We've got our historical balance sheet entered. Next thing we need to do is we need to account for all the transaction and financing adjustments that we're going to have in conjunction with the deal. And in some cases, in some deals, you'll see some adjustments, some purchase price adjustments relative to the working capital. That is, the accountants go in, they say, okay, well, the value of the inventory is X as opposed to what's on the balance sheet, so we're going to make an adjustment there. Or we're going to write up the fixed assets to their fair value in some cases. Here, we're not going to assume any adjustments to the working capital of the fixed assets. We're really going to focus more on adjustments relative to our capitalization, our debt, our equity, adjustments relative to goodwill, adjustments relative to intangibles. All right, so for our current asset adjustments, these will all be zero. And just hard code those in. And then for our subtotal here, total current assets, now we can actually just copy and paste the formula that we have over in our historical column. So it's going to be the same subtotal. We're going to add cash, AR, inventory, and other current assets. So just Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, F9 to recalc. Gross PP&E, cumulative depreciation, we're not going to make any adjustments to that. Again, in the real world, the accountants might write these up to their fair value. We're just trying to keep it simple here. And we can copy the formula for net PP&E as well. Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. You would not want to use a fill command here, because if you look closely, we've got that very narrow cell right between. And if you used a fill command, you'd get some content in here, and it would probably show up as a number sign, because it wouldn't be able to fit. But you'd see something there when you don't want to. All right, so you don't want to use a fill command there. Next thing we need to do is we need to account for some amortizable intangibles. We also need to calculate what our goodwill is going to be. We haven't done either of those yet. Right? And there's nowhere right now that we can link to. So what we're going to do, if you scroll down to the bottom of our worksheet, I'm going to put in some footnotes where we calculate these numbers, and then we're going to link to these up above. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate our goodwill. Remember, we touched on the notion of goodwill. Goodwill represents the difference between the market value of the equity when it's bought out and the book value at the time of purchase. Right, the excess, and usually it is an excess, represents what we call goodwill. That gets booked onto the balance sheet and stays on the balance sheet as long as the accountants don't come in at some point and determine that it's been impaired. Remember, you used to be able to amortize goodwill. That went away probably about 7 years ago. You no longer can, but it gets tested annually for impairment. All right, goodwill, again, difference between market value of equity and book value. So what we want to do for equity purchase price, we want to link back to our sources and uses tab, equals B11, that $169.2 million.